Well, hello and welcome to In Conversation with Jennie and Mark, which we're doing in a slightly different way now, because instead of having it as a live Zoom event, we decided we'd do it as a podcast. So hello, Jennie.
Hello, Mark, and hello, everyone.
And hello, everyone. So we would love to know if you actually listen to this. So if you are listening to it, please let us know. And please let us know what you think of it. And you can get feedback to us in different ways. Perhaps we'll go through that again at the end. But we're really pleased that you've chosen to tune in whatever way you have done so. And we look forward to our conversation. So, Jennie, do you want to tell us a bit about the reading we're looking at tonight, where it's from, and that sort of thing?
So today we are looking at Mark chapter 8, verses 27 to the end. And it is the gospel reading for this coming Sunday, the 15th of September. So we're really doing a little bit of sermon prep as well, aren't we, between us?
Basically, we are. Yeah, we're doing a bit of sermon prep and also hopefully give you a chance, as you're listening to this, to have thought a little bit about the passage before we get to Sunday. And you might think, you might have a bit of a preview of what we're going to say, or we might have completely changed our mind by the time we get there. So
It's possible.
definitely possible. So I'm going to share the screen with the Bible passage on. If you're watching this, if you're listening to it, we're going to read it out anyway. So we're going to read it between us. So this is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 8 and verses 27 to the end of the chapter. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things."
He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." So then,
Now, I've got to ask you a question to start with. I'm going to give you a chance to kick off this really, but I do want to ask a question about it because I know that you have been to Caesarea Philippi, where this passage is set. I've never been there because I've never been to Israel, Palestine, but you have on quite a few occasions, I think, haven't you?
I've tried to. It is a beautiful place, and I do always try and visit if I am over in the Holy Land, yes.
So tell us a bit about Caesarea Philippi, what it's like, what your impressions of it were, and how you look at this passage in the light of having been there.
So I first saw Caesarea Philippi when I went on pilgrimage. I have been across the Holy Land a few times, but the first one was on a pilgrimage, as most people go to it. And on pilgrimage, everybody has something that really speaks to them. A lot of people love the Via Dolorosa, and a lot of people, there's always something for everybody that will speak to them. And for me, it was Caesarea Philippi. It just that was the place. It brought everything to life that you read about. So it's right up at the northernmost tip of Jesus's ministry. So he went all the way up. It's a place that's actually called Banias as well. And it's the start of the River Jordan. It's where the water comes off the mountains and there's spring water. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. with the water and the red rock. And it was the place where, because it was such a source of water, it was the place where all gods of that time were worshipped. So you remember we watched that program, and from gods was quite normal, and it's really obvious at Caesarea Philippi. You can kind of see where carved into the rock where these places would be.
Okay.
And therefore, amongst this rather beautiful backdrop, it becomes really apparent to me what it means for Jesus to say, "Who do they say that I am?" And for them to name him as the Messiah in that place that's so full of people worshipping all other things.
Okay.
It's also like a turning point. So it's a turning point in the story, because once they get there, he then starts to go to Jerusalem. So he geographically turns. It's a turning point in the story. And I kind of loved that poetry of what had happened. And obviously he's heading to Jerusalem to be killed. So we get this pinnacle of, you are the Messiah. And him going, yeah, and it's going to cost me, and it's going to cost you, and it's all going to be really difficult. And now we're off to Jerusalem. And there was just a lot of that spoke to me, really.
Yeah, okay. That's really fascinating, I think, because it really helps to get an idea of the geography of the area. And I've never had the privilege of going. Obviously, I hope one day we do get to go. I'd love to go, but at the moment it's probably not great. But hopefully one day we will, and I'd love to go there with you. But I think I've also been this is a fantastic passage. In many ways, it's a brilliant passage to kind of kick this new way of doing this off with, isn't it? Because, as you say there, it is absolutely central to Mark's gospel. It is in the center of Mark's gospel, isn't it? I think in terms of, the chapter divisions, it's, I don't know, there's 16 chapters in Mark. We are halfway through. And obviously Mark didn't write the chapter divisions, but he wrote this as the central point, really, didn't he? It's all Jesus' Galilean ministry has been building up to this point. And as you say, from this point on, we're not going back to Galilee anymore, are we? We're going on to Jerusalem. Did you get a sense of that when you were there? Did it sort of lend itself, the geography, or as you remember it, did it lend itself to that kind of feeling?
I think once I realised it was the northernmost point, and it's not that far from the Syrian border, then yeah, there's just something beautiful about it being the geographical turning point. I mean, on pilgrimage, you're always getting on a bus and off a bus. So maybe not quite as much as if we went back and we did it by ourselves. But yes, just the knowledge once I got the map out as well. I really like the idea of him being named amongst all the other kinds of worship that was going on. And I would imagine, although it's really peaceful, it's a really tranquil place now, that actually at the time you can imagine it being bustling and people shouting and screaming, and you can imagine what that was like. And I think for me, that's what it feels like in ministry. I'm saying Jesus is the Messiah, and yet people are worshipping, I don't know, going to Waitrose shopping on a Sunday, or going to football or children's stuff. They're worshipping other things.
I can tell that you're now a vicar in South Kensington because you
go to Waitrose shopping.
But let's move on from that. Beautifully done, though. That's lovely.
We just pop to Waitrose now, darling.
To Waitrose, yeah. I don't even know where the nearest Waitrose is to here in Barking. Anyone listening? No, you can tell us. But this, central passage, really important. I've always loved this passage because it seems to me that, well, Jesus is quite playful actually with his disciples to be with, isn't he? He's this opening question that he brings to them. Who do people say that I am? And of course, I always think this is the key question. This is the key question. This is, from a Christian perspective, certainly, as you say there, all sorts of other people worshiping all sorts of things. But from a Christian point of view, this is the crucial question of life. Who do you think Jesus is? Who do you think he is? And how you face that question, answer that question, for me, this is always determined. This is a crucial question that I think everyone needs to look at. Who do you think this man is who certainly what did you, we were talking about this the other day, didn't you? Did you say, like one third of the world, or, maybe even more than that, agrees
it used to be, it used to be 33% population are Christian.
billions and billions of people across the world think that this man was somebody really, really special. In fact, probably more than that in some ways, because there's a lot of the faiths revere Jesus, even if they don't necessarily answer it in the way that Peter does.
Yeah, that's only 33% thinking he's the Son of God.
Who do you think this man is? This is a really crucial question. And I like the way Jesus tees it up. He tees it up here, doesn't he? Who do people say that I am? And they answer him, oh, well, you're John the Baptist, or you're Elijah, or one of the prophets. And then he kind of brings in the sucker punch, doesn't he? Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. Actually, I don't really care about, I'm not really bothered about what other people say. I really want to know, what do you think? Who do you think I am?
It's really interesting that his closest friends didn't immediately come out with it, though. They started with, well, others say you're this and others say you're that. They still weren't incredibly sure. They weren't confident to just say it, were they? It was only Peter who's always saying anything.
You kind of wonder to what extent is he setting them up, really, isn't he? But yeah, I mean, I suppose Jesus is working up to the big question, isn't he? Okay, I'm not really bothered about what other people think. I really want to know what you think. And I guess the way I think that's interesting, because the way I look at that is, I think Jesus answers that question of all of us, actually. And we can, and ultimately Jesus would say to each one of us, I'm not really bothered about what you think other people think, or doesn't really matter. Maybe even it doesn't really matter what other people think. What do you think? What do you say?
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair. I mean, that is what matters, really, isn't it? Doesn't really matter what other people say he is.
So, yeah, okay, as you say, Peter, who is always one to, never backwards and coming forwards until one critical moment in his life that we won't worry about now. But anyway, Peter answers straight away, you are the Messiah. Or you are the Christ would be, of course, another way of translating that, because Christ is the Greek word for Messiah.
Yeah.
So what do you make of Peter's response here?
Well, he absolutely knew, didn't he? He absolutely knew, because otherwise, I don't think you're going to make yourself look stupid like that unless you're absolutely convinced that this is who he is. And particularly in that area surrounded by those people where you could have been overheard. You are the Christ. You are the one we have all been waiting for. This is it. And of course, that's part of Peter's story, isn't it? That's why the future that we're not discussing at the moment, but that one critical moment is so disappointing, because actually he knew. He really, really knew. And he knew what it would cost, because Jesus then goes on to tell him what it's going to cost. So he already knew.
Actually, I think that's a really interesting point that I perhaps hadn't even realized before you said it then. So just so you're aware, people are aware as you're listening, the bit we're talking about, obviously, when we're, talking about this other critical point in Peter's life, is when Jesus is on trial and Peter 3 times denies that he knows him, with increasing amounts of swearing, it has to be said, if you actually read through the account. And I think that point you make there is, he knew, you're right. He knew. So it just makes the betrayal even more poignant, doesn't it? When you kind of then look back to this moment in Peter's life where he has this, he's the one given this revelation. He's the one who says it. And I guess what's interesting about that is, isn't it? How has Peter come to that conclusion? I guess, think about all the things that Jesus has done in the previous, because we've known from the beginning, of course, if you read through Mark's gospel, Mark straight up the top, Mark 1, verse 1, this is the story of Jesus, the Christ, this is his gospel. But here, this is in the story. What do you think, Pete? What do you think has brought Peter to that point?
I wonder whether he's just understood the opportunity that's in front of him more than the others have, or is it that he just is more outspoken than the others, and that they knew as well, really? but you kind of get a picture of Peter's personality more than the others, really. And I think he's almost seen a better way, a better life, and that has to be for a reason. I think he's more clever than we sometimes give him credit for, and more deeply thinking than we sometimes give him credit for. But yeah, he knew that this was an opportunity. This was something big in front of him. I mean, my question would be is whether the others recognised that and were just more timid of saying it, or whether Peter knew more than they did.
You kind of wonder, don't you, what conversations they were having between them as this ministry unfolds. You know, I mean, I think one of the remarkable things for me that I keep coming back to in my own faith and reflection upon it is, you know, we do have to keep coming back to this question: who is this man? Who is he? And you know, grapple with the fact that these people who were with him as his earliest followers come to the conclusion, actually going beyond even a messianic expectations. I mean, you know, they only developed the idea of what we would call incarnation. This is really, because even a Messiah doesn't have to be the God incarnate as we understand that and believe that to be as Christians now, does it? You know, the Messiah, the anointed one, the one sent by God. I mean, do we necessarily think that's an incarnation thing? They even come to realize of that later, don't they? About who he really is, and who was really with them. And that seems like a remarkable conclusion to come to. I mean, I've known some really good people in my life, but I've never wanted to come to the conclusion that, you know, they were God.
Yeah, these remarkable people you've known. I mean, how many people have they healed at the drop of a hat or fed? I mean,
but that's a good point. Yeah,
he's done a fair bit to convince, and he's heard Jesus teaching in the synagogues, and which is what makes me think he probably sat and listened far more than we sometimes give him credit for. I think he listened to the teaching. And, you know, and I ask about these questions about the other disciples, but also Peter is kind of a key player, which suggests that he was closer to Jesus in many ways.
But Jenny, time is moving on, and we've only really looked at the first half of the passage, haven't we? Because actually then Peter, from being in this, wow, amazing, you know, you're the Messiah, woo, bells and whistles are going off, wow, he's the Messiah.
I know what you're going to say.
Hey, next, Satan, it's get behind me, Satan. I mean, what a roller coaster Peter's on in this passage, isn't it? Because, you know, basically, just again to reiterate the story, Jesus then begins to tell them, well, this is what being the Messiah means. You know, the Son of Man, interestingly, the phrase that Jesus always used to refer to himself, must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, which interestingly, I did have a quick look at a commentary before we did this recording. Even still at the end of verse 29, when Peter says you're the Messiah, Jesus says, don't tell anyone. And he's been saying don't tell anyone for the whole of the 8 chapters. There's a whole thesis about this, which I learned about in college. Don't worry about that now. And then, but even here, but when he starts talking about the stuff about he's going to suffer, he's going to be killed, he's saying that quite openly. So, Messiah stuff, got to keep quiet about that. But actually, this whole thing about it's going to mean suffering and death and rejection and all those things we don't like to think about, talking quite openly about that. And Peter says this isn't the way, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, they only have to keep quiet about the fact that he is the Messiah, because he then goes on to teach them about what's going to happen to the Messiah. But not, so they don't have to be quiet about that, do they?
No, they don't have to be quiet.
That's not a secret, because to be honest, that is going to happen. The only thing to be quiet about is the fact that he is the Messiah, because otherwise it's all going to happen out of turn, isn't it? I mean, let's be fair to Peter here. It's not what you want to hear, is it?
No.
He's just made this huge declaration. You don't want to hear that it's all going to go terribly wrong.
Really isn't what you want to hear. I think one of the difficulties we have when we read these kind of passages, or any part of the Bible really, is we're so familiar with the story.
Yes.
So know where it's going. We so know what's going to happen that it's lost its shock value for us. It's not shocking for us to read this in this is what Jesus thinks being the Messiah is all about. And yes, I've sat through hundreds of sermons and probably given hundreds of sermons where, we can talk about what the messianic expectations were. They were going to kick the Romans out, blah, 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 blah. And actually, yeah, but we know what it's really all about. But actually, the shock value of this, is just unbelievable. I mean, you can just imagine Peter's utter bewilderment. What are you talking about? What are you on about? How can you? And the whole thing about you're gonna be rejected. You go, no. This isn't what it's about.
You're right. We've got used to it, so we don't even picture it in our minds anymore, do we? Unless we're sitting like we are doing today and imagining what it would be like. It's so easy to just skim over this passage because we have heard it so many times. Yeah. But then we get to the bit that's really difficult, so we just we definitely try and skim over that bit, don't we? But
which bit are we talking about?
You've got to take up your cross and follow him, or save your life to lose it, or lose your life to save it.
Really?
Sounds a bit difficult. Let's give that one up.
Let's not talk about that. Let's
move on.
Let's go back to all that rise again stuff. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I don't want to be losing
we know where
my
it's
life.
going. We know where the story's going, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because of course we say we're Christians, we're followers of Christ, we are followers of Jesus. This is the Jesus way. It's not going to be all glory and victory, and it's going to be self-denial and taking up your cross and I mean, there is of course there's an absolute paradox in this, isn't there, which I remember pondering on when I was a child, because I was brought up in a Christian sort of background and knew these, and I thought I don't really understand what that means. I don't think, Jenny, I still really understand what it means, but anyway, we've got it here. If you want to save your life, for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it.
Okay.
What is going on with that? Help me out.
I think this is a lot easier if you haven't been brought up in a Christian background.
Okay.
So I am well aware that my decision to follow Jesus and my decision to go into ministry has been costly. I had a lovely life in some respects. I loved to go out partying. I loved the community that I was part of. I was having a really good time. There's no good pretending that I wasn't. I was having a really good time for a lot of my life. Not when I started to look for church and go back. That's a whole different story. But for most of it, I was having quite a nice time. And I have left that life behind because some of it was completely immoral. Some of it was illegal. But I've left it behind for my faith. I have lost that life and I have lost those friends for my faith. And now I have gained a life, absolutely gained a life. And then you further and say I've gained eternal life. But I have gained a whole different life in all its fullness. But I can definitely see what I've lost in order to gain. And I think that's a lot easier to see if you can look back and see a whole different way of living. It is possibly more difficult if you've been brought up in the faith. You will have lost, but in many ways, you've lost things that you didn't have in the first place. You didn't have. And then also,
I think I can relate to the idea that you can't hold on to your own life, can you? And this is one of the paradoxes of life, which whether you want to follow Jesus or not, I mean, you can't hold on to your life. It just slips away. You want to kind of grab hold of it, but it will always elude you. That's true, isn't it? Whether you know,
I
time.
can see it in big things, but also there are just, you've lost the time on a Sunday morning. You're going to worship. I mean, it is costly. It costs you your time. It costs you, I don't know, being able to go and take your child to football on a Sunday morning. You might only be able to go on a Saturday thing. You might have to send them with someone else. It costs you being able to have brunch in the park on a Sunday morning. It costs you silly things like that as well. Just because of the time worship would take up.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You reminded me really of a time, obviously, as people will know, and I had a bit of a time out of ministry. And actually, to begin with, first few months when I was down living with my sister, like Sunday morning, it's like, great, I go get breakfast. And I used to go off and get breakfast at a cafe in Weybridge where I was living.
And I was very jealous.
And you were very jealous, yeah. When I mentioned to you about it. But actually, after about 6 months of that, I was like, I wanted to go back to church. It's true. And that was something in me that I just couldn't, there was something there which I had to go back to, because it wasn't ultimately, I don't know, it just sounds really full of platitudes. Oh, it didn't satisfy me. I mean, the breakfasts were good, but it was just something that was missing. Yes, it's true. Yeah. So it's, because I guess it's interesting to talk about that in these sort of terms, because the thing about, again, these passages, especially perhaps when I was growing up, you see it as the sort of grand gesture, don't you? You've almost got to, does that mean you've got to go and live in a mud hut somewhere, or I don't know, which I haven't done, obviously, but got a very nice house, not living in a mud hut. But yeah, is that, but the way you describe it, you're not seeing it like that.
No, not at all. Never even occurred to me.
Not to live in a mud hut.
Well, no.
Think of a mess. You'd be constantly cleaning.
Where would I go to the toilet? What do you mean? Why a mud hut?
Well, the idea of not holding on to your life, your material possessions, or
like a hermit type thing.
Well, possibly, or just
monastery.
Not holding on to your money or your possessions, or Jesus obviously talks about that in other ways, doesn't he? But you're not seeing it in those terms, are you? As you read,
I'm really not. And I love the fact that you went straight from mud hut rather than a monastery with a bed and some wine or beer. I mean, if I was going to give up my life, mud hut would not be the way forward.
I think I want to be.
You don't want to be a monk. Well, that's good. That's good, seeing as we're married. But it'd be really inconvenient now as well, because
it won't be inconvenient now if I suddenly decide I want to be a monk. Don't worry, I'm not. It's okay.
Yeah. No, I have never seen it in those terms. I'm just quite surprised, actually. I've always seen it in giving up. Well, I've often seen it as giving up the life that I was leading. I've heard it preached before about giving up things inside you. So, we need to give up, I don't know what's inside me, our jealousy, and we need to give up our envy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is great, but like, if we could give those up, you probably would do without this passage, wouldn't you? It's not as simple as that. But I think we often don't preach enough that it is costly to follow Jesus. I think we do often shy away from it because that's not the warm and fluffy, loving gospel that we want to hear.
Yeah, and Mark certainly is not shying away from that, is he? Mark does not shy away from the fact that it is going to cost you. And of course, for many people around the world, it really does cost, everything, cost them their life. It will cost them their life.
Yes, and there are many people fleeing for their lives, and I think sometimes we do them a disservice for just scooting past it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a key passage. We probably need to be bringing things to a close, but I hope if you are listening, you've enjoyed our conversation and given you some things to think about. If you do come along to either Holy Trinity or St. Margaret's on Sunday, you will see how these thoughts have developed over the few days when we come to write something hopefully reasonably meaningful about them.
We all
But
find a
it's
message
great
in there.
passage. It's a great passage, and it is a passage I think that bears study and reflection all through our lives because of this key question: who do you think Jesus is? And I hope that both at St. Margaret's, and I'm sure Jenny, you'd say the same at Holy Trinity, that we're on that journey together. We're still answering that question all the time, aren't we?
Oh yeah, we haven't got it sorted. We're just journeying through, hoping for the best. Stumbling through life with God by my side, I think I once wrote.
What was that, sorry?
Stumbling through life with God by my side.
Well, I think that's a pretty good way to finish. So look, thank you for listening, and do let us know if you have listened. We'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us through all the contact details that you'll find on either St. Margaret's or Holy Trinity website. And we will be back for another In Conversation With next week. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening.